Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Samanthropolitics. I apologize that we're starting a little bit late. As goes with live streaming, we did have a few technical difficulties, but I'm super excited to have our amazing guest in the wings that can really help us understand the implications of this recently leaked document to Politico about Roe v. Wade potentially being overturned. Her name is Jeryl Hayes. She is fantastic. If you are interested in supporting us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/Samanthropolitics1 if you think this coverage is important. So I want to get right into things because we are running on the clock. So today I went to the Supreme Court where protesters were protesting what just happened, which was an unprecedented leak of a 98-page document, a majority opinion by the Supreme Court that is in reference to a Mississippi case that was banning abortion at 15 weeks of pregnancy. Now, that runs up against Roe v. Wade, which, by the way, Roe v. Wade does not say that you can have an abortion at any point in the pregnancy. It's up to the point of fetal viability outside the womb, which is around 23 weeks. So the Mississippi law, 15 weeks, ran up against that, and it was brought to the Supreme Court a couple months ago to say, is it constitutional? Now, if it's Roe v. Wade, if it's going up against Roe v. Wade, it should be unconstitutional. However, the Supreme Court that now has a majority conservatives on the Supreme Court, including our most recently added justice, who is, not the most recently added, but the very religious Amy Coney Barrett, which is becoming incredibly obvious and non-feminist, has made it a majority conservatives within the Supreme Court. So this document was leaked to Politico on Monday night. It is, again, an unprecedented leak. The Supreme Court is usually airtight when it comes to leaks versus the White House and Congress. So the fact that this got out, I think, shows that somebody wanted to undermine this happening because it is just so scary. Now, Roe v. Wade has been in act for almost 50 years, since 1973. And also, just to clarify, what does it mean if Roe v. Wade is overturned? So Roe v. Wade is a federal law. So what that means is that states have to abide by that federal law. So if a state has a ban on abortion up to 15 weeks, for example, Mississippi, that now runs up against the federal law. So if the federal law is gone, basically the states have carte blanche to do whatever they want when it comes to abortion. They can outlaw abortion in cases of rape and incest. They can outlaw abortion in case of medical viability issues. They can outlaw abortion in whatever the heck case they want because somebody has, is purple. They literally can do whatever they want, and essentially there's no protections from the federal government to tell states they can't do that. So if this does go into effect, we're going to see about half of the United States lose access to abortion rights. That means that women from those states, if they want to gain access to abortion, are going to have to travel across borders, which, as we'll talk to Jeryl about, can affect women who don't have the means very much so. Now, this is ironic because federal funding under the Hyde Amendment already prohibits federal funding from going to abortions. So this means women who are on Medicaid already have a lot of trouble accessing abortions just for the fact that they don't have insurance that will pay for it because Medicaid is federally funded. So this puts even more burdens in front of those women and more cost burdens that travel in addition to the insurance, in addition to not having insurance coverage. So essentially what this will do is leave it up to states' rights. Now, just a few things that I wanted to bring to light that I think are important is that maternal mortality and infant mortality will certainly increase if Roe v. Wade is overturned. Why is that? Because pregnancy is dangerous, especially to women under the age of 18. It's extremely dangerous. The female body is not ready for it yet. Pregnancy is more dangerous than an abortion. Carrying a pregnancy to term, having an abortion is actually less likely to cause complications than, get this, getting your wisdom teeth removed. It is also safer than a colonoscopy, which is a little upsetting because I have to have a colonoscopy in a couple of weeks. I'm not going to lie. So it is estimated that maternal mortality rates in the US, which have already gone up by 20% 20% from 2019 to 2020 will raise by another 20% if there's a total ban on abortions. Zach, you can put up that table so we can see those numbers. Now, maternal mortality in the US had already risen from 20 deaths per 100,000 live births in 2019 to 24 in 2020, marking an 18% increase. There's been an increase of 37% since 2018. We are the only developed country where maternal mortality has been on the rise. And guess what? Putting more legislation around abortions and banning abortion is only going to mean that more women die. So when people say that they're pro-life, they're anti the life of women because women are going to die. The research is extremely clear about that. But I just want to go to our guest because she is waiting in the wings. Our guest is Jeryl Hayes. She is the movement building director at If, When, How, Lawyering for Reproductive Justice, where she shapes movement building strategies and sees the mobilization and networking of law students and legal professionals to champion reproductive justice. Prior to working with If, When, How, Jeryl worked as the director of public policy for Physicians for Reproductive Health and as a domestic policy analyst with Advocates for Youth. She is a lawyer with a JD from Washington University in St. Louis and has an LLM with a specialization in gender and the law from AU. She's also served as the board president of the DC Abortion Fund, which was a volunteer nonprofit that helped pregnant people in the DC area who could not afford the cost of an abortion. Again, because of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding, as in Medicaid, to go for abortions. That means we need private funds to help those women. She also previously served as the chair of the Women's Information Network, is on the board of trustees for Denison University, and all sorts of other impressive things. So she has a speaking engagement tonight, so I want to bring her in and see what she has to say about this. Jeryl, welcome to the show.
Samantha, thank you so much for having me with you tonight.
I'm so delighted to have you, and I do have to apologize to our guests. We're having some technical issues, so we don't get to see her beautiful face, but she is going to be on audio answering our questions. So, I think what everyone's wondering is, how did Roe last for this long, even under conservative Supreme Courts and, Republican administrations? Why is it now coming under fire all of a sudden?
So I think that people need to understand, there is a lot more support for abortion rights than we realize. And that means that even among conservative folks, they actually don't want to see this law fall. It's actually sort of a fringe group that have really been pushing that. There's been this strategy for decades to sort of overturn Roe, but it's really been for conservatives, it's actually been a great sort of fundraiser for them. It's been a political, they've used it politically as a way to organize, to keep people, voting for Republicans, to keep conservatives sort of in positions of power because of this, sort of threat of, we're going to use this opportunity to overturn Roe one day. This is actually now a situation where we joke about it being, the dog that caught the car. This actually, for some conservatives, they may not say this out loud, but they're saying this behind closed doors. This is not actually the result that they want. And one of the reasons we know this is because there are pro-life people who identify as being pro-life, who are accessing abortion care. There are people who are, who say publicly that they are pro-life, but are helping, the women in their family sort of procure abortions. Because we know that people, for as long as people have been able to get pregnant, people have been ending their pregnancy. And, this abortion is a part of reproductive health care. It is a part of life. Even for those who might not, identify themselves as pro-choice, they are still accessing abortion. So it's actually an issue that is
Hmm.
more popular. We have, polling results that says the majority of people actually support abortion rights. And on the, it has been used as sort of this political tool.
So it's essentially a rallying cry for the Republican Party.
Exactly. This has been the sort of issue that has been a singular issue for many folks. Even if there are other issues that they don't like about politician, if they are, if they identify as being pro-life, then that's the sort of single issue that folks will sort of vote on. But
I remember when I was doing my master's thesis, and there was some research that showed that essentially it became a rallying cry for the far right when the civil rights movement was happening, and it was no longer politically correct to basically have a party that was built around racism. Have you heard anything about in that light?
Yes, that's absolutely correct. At the time, Southern Democrats were a little upset about the Civil Rights Act that were happening, and the Republicans saw this as a way to pull particularly Southern Catholic Democrats into the party by making sort of contraception and abortion these sort of wedge issues. Prior to that, it had really been sort of a personal responsibility issue. You had presidents like President George W. Bush, who had ties to Planned Parenthood. So this wasn't, really until the last few decades has really become such a wedge issue. It was really used as a way to pull Southern Democrats into the Republican Party and kind of,
Hmm. So
it was a
you know,
strategic.
how much of this is just it's hard to even read a leader's opinion and not just have in the back of my head, this is all BS. I mean, this is it's all about the Catholic Church. It's all about controlling women's bodies. Like, what are your thoughts on the legit, like his reasoning within the opinion as a lawyer yourself?
So what's really hard, and the draft opinion is still just a draft, so we have to remember to kind of take it with a grain of salt. But what I think was most alarming for many folks is the ways that they are going after individual rights and the right to privacy. And
Mm.
really, abortion is just the sort of tip of the iceberg. There are a number of other rights that have been procured because of the Roe reasoning that are now at threat. How people form their families,
So
who.
I'm gonna stop you for 1 second just
Sure.
because for the non-lawyers in the room, basically what she's saying is that there's been a lot of other cases that have been decided based upon the jurisprudence that and the reasoning that was in Roe v. Wade, and now those cases are going to come under threat. Is that correct, Cheryl?
That's correct. And gay marriage is one. The Obergefell opinion that came out several years ago is one that relied on the Roe reasoning, that could be is has already been talked about being targeted. So who you decide to be in a relationship with, whether that's somebody of a different gender, if that's somebody of a different race, how you decide to form your family, all of those things can now be subject to state law.
So is the privacy idea is that saying that like you can't have interracial dating, for example. I mean, like what is this 1950? So
That's
like that's literally something that could be Mississippi could say you can't marry a person of color if you're a white person.
that's right. So those laws were called Anti-Miscegenation Laws, and there was, the Supreme Court case Loving v. Virginia is the Supreme Court case that sort of allowed interracial marriage to happen all across the country. But there were states prior to that that specifically had laws on their books about anti-miscegenation, that you couldn't have two different races sort of marry. And that case wasn't decided until 1967, and until recently there were still states that had those laws on the books, and we've already heard from some politicians about potential of reinstating some of those laws. And part of the reason is
So
wanting.
you've heard politicians actually talk about basically using this as a litmus test to reinstate other racist law, other laws that interfere in individual rights. Is that
There's
am
a
I
there's a
incorrectly?
very slippery slope that can happen. based on the based on the loss of this sort of right to privacy.
Wow. So, sorry again, Gerald. So, why now? Like, how has this happened? I think I asked you and then I cut you off. Why is this happening right now in 2022?
So this is a result of what happened in the 2016 election. This was Donald Trump getting elected and saying that, what he wants to do is to put folks on the Supreme Court who are going to overturn Roe. That was, one of his campaign promises that he made. That was one of the sort of litmus tests that he had for the Supreme Court justice candidates. And despite them,
And is that because, I'm going to stop you for one. Sorry, I'm going to keep stopping you because it's just so much intrigue here. Is that because Trump is, if you're saying that like most conservatives do support Roe, is that because Trump is funded by a lot of these far right fringe elements?
Yes, he's sort of tapped into, a group of folks who aren't necessarily what are sort of considered mainstream conservatives. And so I think for many of there were opportunities in the past when when the Republicans were in control of Congress and the White House, where they could have put together federal legislation, they could have passed federal legislation that would have banned abortion all across the country. Um,
Hmm.
and they didn't do that because politically it wasn't a good move for them.
Hmm.
Trump is, acting in a different vein, right? Like he doesn't follow the sort of traditional methods of, the traditional pathway that most conservatives have had. They have had numerous times to sort of enact federal legislation, and they've chosen not to, in part because in the past the Supreme Court has followed what's called precedent, which means that
Hmm.
cases that are decided, generally speaking, there is a deference to those past justices, to the past sort of wisdom. Sometimes that you can, sort of make adjustments to cases, but generally, especially for a case that has been around as long as Roe has, 49 plus years, generally speaking, that is precedent to continue to stay in the same vein. And in fact, the court had a couple of different opportunities to completely overturn Roe, and they didn't. In
Hmm.
the 1992 Casey versus Planned Parenthood case, they had an opportunity to overturn Roe.
And was it a conservative majority at that time?
Uh, there was a sort of some swing votes that were happening there, and so it resulted in not a full there's just some like legal. There was a plurality, not a majority opinion, which gets into some sort of legal mumbo jumbo. But essentially, they had enough sort of votes to, if they wanted to really overturn it, they could. But they gave deference to Roe. They did weaken elements of Roe, but they didn't explicitly overturn it when they had the opportunity. The same thing happened in 2016 with the whole women's health case out of Texas.
Hmm.
They had an opportunity to overturn Roe. They just, they opted not to do that. And again in 2018, in the June medical case, again they had an opportunity to overturn Roe, and they didn't. At that time, they were still following the sort of precedents, upholding the sort of integrity of the Supreme Court.
Hmm.
What we have seen previously from the Supreme Court is when there are cases that come to the Supreme Court from states that are, explicitly trying to, that are explicitly passing laws that are directly against Roe. So that's the 15-week bans. It's the 6-week bans. Um, in the past, the Supreme Court has said, no, you can't enact those. Those go against Roe. What has changed, and what shocked a lot of folks in the legal community in September, is when the SB8 case, that most folks' understanding of it is blatantly unconstitutional, when
Hmm.
that was not stayed by. So when
Right.
the Supreme Court didn't issue a statement saying, this law cannot go into effect, when they
Right.
effectively allowed it to go into effect, that was a signal to most folks in the legal community that this Supreme Court is not operating in the same way that past Supreme Courts have, when they have the majority that they do have, a 6-3 conservative to liberal majority, it's signaling that they are operating in a different manner than they have in the past, and that for a lot of folks, they're now concerned about what kind of cases could come up against the Supreme Court, that the Supreme Court is not going to follow past precedent, that they're not going to follow the sort of general ways that the court has acted in the past. So
So what is that? Doesn't that undermine the integrity of the Supreme Court? I mean, if they're not, isn't the whole, I mean, my sister's a lawyer. I won't pretend to be a lawyer, but isn't like the whole legal field based on precedent, based on looking for precedents to support your argument? Like, what is this? How doesn't this affect like the whole practice of law? I don't really understand.
Yeah, that is why folks are really, really concerned right now, is because the Supreme Court, in the way that it was designed in our Constitution, was set to be the sort of check against Congress, against the president, balancing out those powers. And that the fact that that is no longer, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore, really has a lot of folks really concerned about what other cases could come up for to the Supreme Court, that they again would not act in the ways that we would anticipate that they act. And what kind of license then does this give states in terms of the types of laws that they could pass at the state level, that there's not a protection. In the past it's been, well, that's going to get shut down by the Supreme Court. If that's no longer a concern, now states basically have carte blanche, the ability to just pass whatever laws that they want to.
And that's not with regard to abortion. That's with regard to anything, you're saying.
That's with regard to anything. Where there's a lot of concern right now about voting rights, because many of those can be sort of challenged at the state level. And if the Supreme Court is not going to sort of protect voting rights, there's not a lot of recourse that folks have to push back, other than really trying to mobilize and organize folks to vote out those legislators who are acting against the interests of the general public.
I mean, I think that's so shocking, and I don't think a lot of people understand the implications of this beyond abortion.
That's right. Abortion is the sort of tip of the iceberg, but any sort of rights that aren't explicitly stated in the Constitution are, that again, this is
right, because this reasoning was that abortion is not enshrined in the Constitution and therefore it should not be allowed. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, that's part of Alito's reasoning for why he says that Roe was wrongly decided, and that the sort of other cases that sort of relied on that reasoning are subject to then go back to
my gosh, which is crazy because the Constitution was ratified in 1787.
That's right. You and I would not be considered, members. We
wouldn't have the right to vote. I mean,
we would not have the right to vote. Minorities would not have the right to vote. There's non-landowners would not have the right to vote. Correct. There's so much that has changed and shifted in our country, in the past 250 years, that it's a little absurd to really think of, that strict originalist sort of line of thinking that everything, right, that what's in the Constitution is the only way that we can sort of confer rights. So this is why this is an issue that really has a lot of folks very concerned about the future of our country, about the future of our democracy. And this is why people really need to be engaged in the political process, because it can slip away from us very easily. And we're seeing what happens when you don't, have these checks and balances, when you don't have these guardrails in place to keep our democracy on track.
So if all these individual rights things, it's also just like so ironic because, like the Republican Party is supposedly the government or supposedly the party that's supposed to be about the government staying out of people's business. And yet this is like all these private things can now be decided by the states, which is really up against the whole idea of conservatism.
The hypocrisy is astounding. It will make your head spin to think about all of the ways that they talk in contradictions. And it's, basically dependent on whose rights they're trying to protect, in terms of, which avenues they want to sort of move forward about what the government should do and what the government shouldn't do. They like to pick and choose. And we see this in, specifically in relation, to families, right? They were saying, they're the party of family values. They're the party of
Mm.
protecting, innocent lives. And yet when there are opportunities for them to support families by making
Voting for extending the child tax credit.
right by making the economic situations that
Right.
people have access to good paying jobs that have a livable wage, that there are protections for pregnant workers so that they're not fired, for asking for accommodations because of their pregnancy, that that people have access to paid sick leave and parental leave, so that they can actually take care of a child once that child does come. There are all sorts of ways that they could really put their money where their mouth is and support, families, but they also choose
Right.
not to do that as well.
Right. And also from the economic perspective, it's like if you want lower taxes, don't have women that can't afford children and families that can't afford children because have children because they end up on welfare, which raises your taxes.
Yeah, there's a challenging aspect of this is we know that the majority of people who are seeking abortions are already parents, so they're already
Mhm.
trying to, like, really look at their economic circumstances, how they make ends meet, and they're making determinations that are in the best interest of their family, because they want to be able, they're trying to avoid poverty in some ways, or stay out of, situations where they don't have the economic means, and for them, the best choice is to terminate the pregnancy, because they can't afford another child. And so they're making strong economic decisions. And yet, the anti choice folks wanted to sort of take away, that ability for families to make, the best choice for their individual, family needs, which is very challenging.
I remember reading Margaret Sanger's autobiography, the inventor of birth control, and she talks basically about how she was essentially inspired by the horror of living. I think she was in Boston and seeing these like Irish families that were just exploding, and they couldn't afford, they were living in poverty and could not afford more children, and seeing people die on the, on the table and maternity because they didn't, family planning, like you also have to have space between your pregnancies for your body to be able to recover, especially if you have something like a C-section.
Absolutely.
And if you don't have that space, it's a much higher likelihood of maternal mortality, correct?
That's right. And that is one of the reasons that maternal mortality rates can be high, is, when people don't have access to contraception, to space, and think about the timing and spacing, of their pregnancies, when people have underlying health conditions that can be exacerbated, by a pregnancy.
Hmm.
And in some cases it may not reach the point of being sort of life or death, that may trigger some, exceptions in some cases, but it can really impact, their health. For example, you, may have, a woman who might be in kidney, have kidney issues, and she can't go on dialysis if she's pregnant, or there may be some, cancer treatments that may be needed, that can't happen if a person is
Mm.
pregnant. In some cases, it's things like pain medication, right? That there are somebody who is managing a chronic, illness, and takes certain medications, to manage that pain. That if they become pregnant, they now can't use those medications with the pregnancy, and you have, challenges of pharmacists who aren't fulfilling, medications if they know that somebody is pregnant. So you have these sort of interferences in people's, lives, and being able to sort of make the best medical decisions, that should be between a patient and their doctor or their family, or whoever they determine, is who they want to be making those decisions. It should
Right.
not be the government making those
Right.
decisions for people.
Right. Yeah, and the irony too is I remember a friend of mine said to me, I would never have an abortion, but I don't care if someone else does. But I'm pro-life. And I was like, no, you're pro-choice. It doesn't matter. Like, that's the whole idea. It's not that you wouldn't get an abortion, it's that you believe that women have the right to choose whether or not they want that and that they have access to that.
Absolutely. And in part because there are so many different situations that somebody may need abortion care. And they might not be situations that anyone has ever put themselves in or even thought of. And it's not until you're faced with a challenging situation that you can actually make that determination. And so we would want the full range of care to be available to somebody so that they can, with their doctor, make that determination. In this situation, this is the best case of action.
Right.
That should be, advised by medical professionals, not by legislators. Legislators are not doctors. They should not be trying to, practice medicine without a license by making,
Hmm.
passing legislation that is going to restrict medical care.
So speaking of that, what's something we saw in the Texas case is this vigilantism of being able to run after a doctor or an Uber driver that goes to a clinic for helping to obtain an abortion. Is it possible not just that states will abortion, but that more states will criminalize women who have them or people who aid in that? Is that a possibility?
It's not just a possibility; it's already happening.
Hmm.
We are seeing an increase in people being sort of prosecuted for outcomes of their pregnancy. In some cases, it's somebody who may have self-managed an abortion, and they may have some complications, and they present at an emergency room, and a nurse or a doctor decides, I think this person, tried to uh, self-manage their abortion, and I'm gonna, call the law enforcement on them. We've seen that situation happen. We've seen people who have experienced, a stillbirth at home,
Mm.
and based on sort of how they present. Somebody might say, you might have a prosecutor who says, "I don't know that that was a natural, sort of." Stillbirth, we're just going to prosecute you, and you using laws that were never meant to be used against a pregnant person.
Mm.
We are seeing that sort of increase already happen, and we know that that's going to be in cases where states have more and more restrictions. That people will have more and more risk of being criminalized because of their pregnancy outcomes. And we know who is most likely to already is being surveilled by the state. It's more people of color, it's young people, it's queer folks, it's people who are undocumented, who are disproportionately impacted and most likely to come sort of be surveilled by the state. And so that is a real concern. Of
Is there I just had an idea. Is it possible that we could overturn the Hyde Amendment to, like, alleviate? Because wouldn't that be by executive order to, like, alleviate some of the
So the Hyde Amendment is a policy writer. It's part of the budget process. So Congress
um,
every year has the opportunity to remove those Hyde restrictions.
mm,
And there it's more it's with anyone who has a relationship with the government where they have public insurance through the government. So you mentioned Medicaid, that is one group. Medicare is another group.
mm,
Folks who have the Children's Health Insurance program CHIP, anyone who works for the government, anyone who is in custody of the government. So that is folks in immigration detention centers. That's folks in prison. That's folks who are in the child welfare system. So it's beyond just folks who have Medicaid. There are
mm,
military folks. Though they all are subjected to those restrictions as well. And so
mm,
yeah, it's the sort of thing. If politicians would be brave, they could remove the Hyde Amendment from the budget every year. They have an opportunity to do that. There just hasn't been enough political will to really make it happen. But there is work that's happening on the ground to really kind of push legislators to think differently about the Hyde Amendment.
What are your thoughts on packing the court, as in adding more justices to the Supreme Court?
I think that that would be a solution that would be available, and actually, it makes sense in terms of how the lower courts have grown in the past. That has been a way that part of the reasons that the court expanded was to keep track. Each justice has is assigned certain districts. There are different district courts that happen geographically, and so we have grown the district courts, but we haven't grown the Supreme Court. So it actually does
Hmm.
numerically make sense to expand the court, and just knowing that Congress, particularly the Senate, has in the past they have really taken seriously the role of judicial, uh, even with Supreme Court justices, it hasn't been this contentious. Before you would have on either side justices being confirmed, 96-3, or very
Mm.
very sort of big margins, because there was this sort of deference of the reverence of the courts.
Hmm.
But in recent in recent politics, that has no longer been the case, and so we can't rely sort of on the Senate to be to be there what they've been in the past, which is very deferential to the judicial process. So expanding the courts is a way of one, you know re- having that balance of Supreme Court justices to the district courts, but also having a better balance on our Supreme Court, of opinions, so that when cases come up to the Supreme Court, they really have an opportunity to be judged on the merits, and not it really feels like it's become so much more political.
Mm.
That's not how it was set up to be.
Right. So I want to have a few more questions. I'll let you get out of here. Are there any other myths about abortion that you would like to debunk on this show?
Sure. One of the we really want to work to reduce stigma around abortion. And so one of the myths is like there are good abortions and there are bad abortions. There are the sort of sometimes people will put forth stories that are meant to be sympathetic and sort of tug at the heartstrings. The reality is people have abortions for all sorts of reasons, and their reasons are all valid. There should not
Mhm.
be some sort of judgment of like, oh, this abortion is worth supporting, but that abortion is
Right.
not.
Like in cases of rape and incest, that's okay. But if it's an unwanted pregnancy for economic reasons, that's not okay.
Right. Yeah, that we should not be sort of judging folks for whatever reasons. We should be supporting. It should be a private medical decision. No one, nobody goes in and like you have a colonoscopy coming up. That's not a thing that people generally know about each other. Like when you have a mammogram, or when you have any other sort of medical procedure, an abortion should be the same way. However you sort of determine that makes sense for you. You should be the only person who is sort of making that determination for yourself. For no other medical procedure do folks feel the need to sort of weigh in. And it that should be the same case for abortion. No matter what the reason is, it should be
Mm.
supported. I think the other one of the other things is that women are the only people who need abortion. And yes, the grand majority of people who need abortion are women, but there are also trans folks and gender nonconforming folks who also
Mm.
need abortion. There are queer folks who need abortion. So it's not just straight women who sort of need access to abortion care. There are a wide variety of folks who need access to abortion care. And so I think there are some folks who sort of want to limit this to like a women's issue. It's not just
Mm.
a women's issue. We can acknowledge that yes, women have borne the brunt of the restrictions. There are and that some of these and acknowledging that some of these restrictions are aimed at women simply because they are women. Like that is absolutely true. But they are not the only one who are sort of subjected. So if we say pregnant people, if we say women and people who can get pregnant, that's not erasing that women are sort of the bearing the brunt of this, but it is acknowledging that there are folks other than women who do need abortion care, and who, that we don't want to stigmatize, folks by just sort of focusing on women or using women only language.
So, yeah, go ahead.
And then the final thing, I just, in terms of abortion, there are folks who choose to self-manage their own abortion, and there's some stigma around self-managed abortion.
Do you
Uh,
mean that they're doing it the self-induced abortion?
that's right. That's they're ordering pills. There are some uh, traditional ways, using herbs and other natural ways that have been passed
Mhm.
down from, that are cultural. There are lots of reasons that somebody might decide to do a self-managed abortion. They don't want it. They don't want to be in the clinical space. They don't, if they're undocumented. We know that ICE has set up checkpoints around reproductive health clinics to deter people from getting health care.
Oh my god. So basically that is horrendous. So they're
Oh yeah,
basically trying to catch
they're using
illegal
laws.
immigrants while
Uh-huh,
they're trying to go get healthcare.
that's right. There are some folks who don't want to face protesters, right? They don't, the gauntlet that has been laid down. There's folks who can't get time off of work, right? If you
Right.
don't have paid sick leave, or if you don't have that ability, if you're working multiple jobs, we also know, the majority of people who are seeking abortion already have children, so they have childcare that they're sort of thinking about. There
Right.
are lots of reasons that somebody might say, you know what, I'd rather do this at home where I can sort of control the setting, that sort of thing. And it's absolutely safe for them to be able to do that. We want to support people. If somebody is like, I want to be in a clinic setting. Great. We want people to have access to clinics. We want there to be providers who are available to them. We want people to be able to afford to have the abortion care that they need. And there are people who are like, I would rather not have my abortion in a clinical setting. Great. We want to support those people as well. So I
Mhm.
think, not privileging certain types of abortion and not stigmatizing people who do self-manage their abortions. We want to make sure that people are able to make sort of the decisions that work best for them. I would also encourage people not to use coat hanger imagery or talk about sort of back alley
Mhm.
abortions. Technology has come a long way. Medical technology has come a long way since 1973, and what the options if a clinical abortion is not available is abortion by pills, and people being able to sort of self-manage abortion, and it's absolutely safe for people to do that if they follow the direction. So,
What happens though? What happens, just paint the picture for us. I have two more questions. This is one of my last ones, but paint the picture. So what happens if this goes into effect?
so prior to Roe, it was a sort of state by state issue. So some states, explicitly said abortion is legal. New York was a state where abortion was legal. Some states explicitly said abortion is illegal. Texas was one of those states where Jane Roe is from. And then there were states that were sort of silent on the issue that didn't say, that had no laws specifically about abortion. When Roe was decided, it essentially said that states cannot enact laws that restricted abortion, based on the sort of trimester system that was sort of modified in 1982 by the Casey case, that then went to, as you mentioned before, the viability standard that said that states couldn't enact laws prior to viability. If it's said that Roe and Casey are overturned, there are more than 20 states that have what are called trigger laws that essentially say as soon as the Supreme Court case is overturned, abortion is illegal in our state effective immediately. So, it's in essence, I'm sorry, I just lost your audio. I think you're muted.
Sorry, my mic was muted. That was an amateur moment. Is that in any case the trigger law, meaning in cases of rape and incest, in case of medical whatever, will the trigger laws make any exceptions, or it's just a total ban on abortions?
That's a state by state decision. In most states, there are those exceptions, but in some states, and especially we've seen recently being discussed that there are states that don't want to include exceptions for rape and incest, and in fact, many of those copycat SB8 from like the Texas
Right.
explicitly don't include exceptions. And in some cases, even for the life of the mother to go into effect, essentially the woman has to essentially be on her deathbed
Oh my
in order.
God.
It's pretty egregious, right? This is why it's not actually about women's health. So there are those states that would abortion would become immediately illegal. In other states, they have taken gone the opposite direction, and affirmatively have said in their state abortion is legal, and that people will always be able to get abortion within the state. And then there are some states that have not that have remained sort of silent on either on whether or not it's legal or illegal, and that's where states may start to decide whether or not to enact specific legislation, and that's where there's actually opportunities to organize. If a state hasn't already affirmatively stated that abortion is legal in their state.
Do you know what states those are? Any ideas?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head. I believe Guttmacher has the most up to date map on their website that shows where all the states are that have the trigger laws, or that have sort of similar laws that would go into effect pretty quickly, and then the states that do have that have affirmatively stated.
Yeah, I
But
see
I
it.
don't know right off which states are sort of silent on whether or not abortion is legal or illegal in their
It
state.
looks like there's a map with red states, blue states, and gray states. No idea what the
Yeah,
meaning
so I would
is.
imagine the gray states are the ones that don't have that don't say either way.
Interesting, because those are some like very liberal states. Interesting.
So
States
that's
unlikely to ban abortion. Yeah, it says states unlikely to ban abortion that would not have the nearest provider for people in states where abortion is banned. States that are sorry. Anyway, this is interesting.
yeah.
Yep.
Well, and so part of what that is also looking at, there are big chunks of states like in the Midwest and in the South that do have those trigger bans, that all of a sudden, that's a huge group of people who are all of a sudden without access to abortion and have to travel, far distances in order to.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you look at this map, it's like, I wish we had this here, but it's like, I mean, basically South Carolina from the east all the way through Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Texas and Florida are all red.
Exactly.
So North Carolina is basically going to be the only place to get an abortion. I mean,
and what that means then for areas like DC, like Maryland, like Virginia, that don't have explicit laws on the books, or in Maryland's case, there is a affirmative support of abortion access. You're going to see an increase of folks coming to what we're calling haven states, where people are traveling great distances to be able to access their abortion. And then even people who are already living in these in these states may have a harder time accessing abortion care because there'll be less appointments available, because there's now lots of folks coming in from other places because they can't get abortions in their own states.
So I want to let you go. So I want to just ask you, the last thing is, I was in my women's leadership class teaching on Monday, and all of a sudden one of the women looked up and goes, Roe v. Wade is about to be overturned. And it was just like this moment of silence in class. What a lot of women are feeling angry, and not just women, people are feeling angry, powerless, furious. I mean, what can they do besides protest in front of the Supreme Court and donate money?
Sure. I mean, and they're right to feel angry, in part because most women of reproductive age have always had, Roe. Like, this was something that was just sort of
Right.
available.
It's just,
So the loss of it is very sort of devastating. And so, as you mentioned, go to protests, donate to abortion funds, donate to independent clinics, donate to the practical support, but then organize. We have a midterm election coming up in November that we really need there to be, legislators who support proactive legislation, because honestly, that is, particularly in states, that is one of the solutions, is to vote out the people who pass this legislation, and vote in folks who are going to support repealing those restrictions, and putting in more affirmative rights. So organize, understand these issues, educate, really look at educating yourselves on candidates, on what's happening at the local and state levels. Really, really be a part of the democracy, be a part of the democratic process. Make sure you're registered to vote, and vote. That is the power that we still have. That's a power that is trying, that folks are trying to deny folks. So make sure that you're exercising that right to vote, because our very democracy is at stake, and we could easily lose it if people aren't paying attention and aren't exercising the power that we do have.
So voting and organizing for the midterms and for 2024. So, people can go to their local Democratic office. I'm sure there's a million places that people can go volunteer.
That's right. And if you specifically want to see how candidates are on specific issues, I know NARAL and Planned Parenthood both have sort of voter guides that will rate politicians, rate legislators on how on how they are on many of these issues that we care so deeply about.
Great. So I just want to ask you any other points you'd like to make before I let you go for the night?
Just to keep our heads up. I know that this feels really heavy, and that that the future looks bleak. But there's still work to be done. There is still ways that we can be vocal about our support, be fully throated in our support for abortion, help to reduce abortion stigma. If you're somebody who has had an abortion, if you feel comfortable, share your abortion story. Everybody loves somebody who has had an abortion, and understand that this is not a rare thing that sort of happens. It's not a sort of fringe thing.
Right. It's 1 out of 3 women, right? Or is it 5?
It's 1 out of 4 now. Who will have an abortion in their lifetime. So it is like a common thing, and all sorts of people get abortions. Pro-choice people get abortions. Pro-life people get abortions. So it is.
Donald Trump's mistresses, I'm sure, have had abortions.
Exactly. But yeah, there's lots of
politics by him, I'm sure.
Right. So there's a lot that we can do to reduce the stigma around this, to fully, use the platforms that we have, use our social media to show support, to share articles, to share, people supporting abortion access, to uplift those social media posts. So there's a lot of ways that people can, really work to reduce stigma, and really work to show support of this healthcare that people need.
All right. Well, Jeryl, I want to just thank you so much for not only for coming on the show, but for being an unbelievable advocate for women's rights, for just the rights of all women, and for trying to help us to retain our right to choose.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for raising this issue and talking about this. And we have to keep talking about it. We have to keep making it clear that this is something that we support.
Thank you so much, Jeryl. I so appreciate you coming on the show, and thanks so much. And I'm glad to hear that I can keep my head a little bit up. I'm definitely one of the ones that have been feeling like, oh no, the world is ending. So thanks for that pep talk at the end as well.
No problem. I'm an eternal optimist, so she's working overtime right now, trying to stay optimistic. But we still have a chance. So.
All right, so let me let you go for the night. But it was such a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for coming on Samanthropolitics.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye. So that was Jeryl Hayes, the movement building director for If Then How, which is an organization that helps with lawyers and law students to get involved in ensuring reproductive justice. And you heard some of the things she said. Our very democracy is at stake. The very jurisprudence that this lies on and the reasoning that applied to this case of saying that the Constitution does not say anything about abortion means that all these other laws that were talked about or were reasoned without the Constitution saying that you could exactly have that are now under threat as well, which is incredibly dangerous. And we could see a shattering of individual rights in so many ways based on this case, not just abortion. So I want to go in to show you some of the footage today from the Supreme Court. Zach, can you just play that video clip of what we saw today at the Supreme Court? So essentially, what we've been seeing at the Supreme Court since Monday night, when this was announced or when this was leaked, there have just been people at the Supreme Court nonstop protesting this decision. We've also seen that security has been ramped up at the Supreme Court because of the level of anger that people have. The other thing that was, quite odd, at least that I saw today, was there was about half pro-choice and there was about half anti-choice people standing there with dismembered images of fetuses, which were disgusting, and many women who were protesting against their own rights, which I found quite odd. But let's hear from some of the women that were there protesting to keep Roe v. Wade. Zach, can you play that first interview?
Hi, can you tell us your name?
Hi, my name is Maisie.
Hi, Maisie, and who's this?
This is Ike. I'm training him to be a service dog.
Oh, that's amazing. How long has he been training?
I've had him since September. He will go on to training until about a year and a half, and then do harness training so he can help a visually impaired individual.
Oh my God, so he's going to be helping a blind person, essentially.
Yes.
So can you tell us what brings you here today, Maisie?
Sure. I am here in response to the draft of the Roe v. Wade appeal, so I think that women and people with uteruses should be fighting back so that we can continue to have rights.
So tell us about your sign.
I believe that Roe v. Wade should not be taken down by the Supreme Court. I think that it is essential to just human rights. It's fundamental, and we absolutely need it in order to keep abortion legal.
Where are you from?
I'm from Fairfax, Virginia.
Okay. What have you seen so far at the protests?
There's a lot of people that are fighting the same thing that I am, which is really uplifting to see. You definitely want to see a big outpouring of support for the same side that you're supporting, and it's really great to see that there's a lot of people fighting the same fight that I am.
What do you think about these women that are holding up these fetus signs and fighting the other side?
I think that they can hold views completely to themselves, but I don't think that if they're personally against abortion, I don't think that they should stop someone else from getting it. I think they can personally make a choice to not have an abortion, but that doesn't mean that nationwide women should not have access to it.
All right, thank you so much, Maisie.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Bye, cute. Bye.
So I love that image of her with her service dog there. Clearly somebody that cares about the world and cares about helping people. She's training a dog to be a service provider for a blind person. Um, you know, it's just tremendous. Can we now see, Zach, can we go to the second interview, please?
So I have Josephine here and Lily. Hi, Lily. Hi, beautiful. So can you tell me what brings you out here today, Josephine?
Well, I'm protesting because they're trying to get rid of Roe versus Wade, and I support it because I needed an abortion to basically survive. I had an atomic pregnancy, and it.
So as you can hear there, Zach, did you play that whole, it's not the 10-second one, right? It's the whole interview? That's the wrong interview. Okay, can you just play the next interview?
Hey, ladies, can you tell me what brings you out here today?
Well, I brought my daughter because I've always told her that you stand up for what is right, even if you're standing alone. But today we're not alone.
Yeah, it's wonderful. We have a lot of support and a lot of great people out here, and I've gotten to know a lot of people, and everybody here is so passionate and kind and intelligent, and it is truly great to see so many wonderful people come together for such a important, very important cause.
Where are you all from?
The Eastern Shore of Maryland.
So can you tell me, why are you pro-choice?
Because I believe that I believe it's a right, and I don't think you don't have to be pro-abortion to be pro-choice. If you don't want to have an abortion, then don't have one. But nobody deserves to have that right taken away from people who want one or need one, especially in cases of rape and sexual assault. For a woman to endure that trauma and then have to go through further trauma by giving birth to a baby that was brought in such a harmful way it's not acceptable. And to be pro-life is to be, it's not, yeah.
What about you, Mom?
Pardon me?
What about you?
Oh, why am I pro-choice? Because, it's up to the individual, and it's a woman's individual right to choose, and no one can tell her what to do with her body, ever.
What have you seen so far at the protests?
I've seen, mostly I've just seen a lot of passionate people. There has been no physical conflicts. Everybody's remaining peaceful, though there may be frustration between the pro-choice protesters and the pro-life protesters. There is no violence, and I think there is an understanding that, this is, I don't know, it's really wonderful. Everybody is very passionate.
What do you think of Amy Barrett Cohen? Or Amy, excuse me. What do you think of
Amy Barrett Cohen?
Yep.
Huge mistake. Huge mistake. And I just am overwhelmed how they wouldn't elect
Merrick Garland.
Yes, Garland, but then somehow they plow through 3 new appointees. And that just doesn't hold true to our American civil liberties.
Okay, I'm going to let you go. Tell me your names to the camera.
My name's Tiffany Powell. I'm from the Eastern Shore of Maryland.
And what's your name, ma'am?
Sadie Powell.
So what I love about that interview is the mother-daughter combo. And the thing the mother says in the beginning about, she taught her daughter to stand up for what she believes in. And the other point that the daughter brings up is, when people are raped or assaulted, that they don't have control over that. And my master's thesis, I looked at children born of wartime rape, and their lives are pretty horrible. Also, something that you see happen is that infanticide actually increases, meaning the actual baby, once it's born, actually being killed increases when women don't have access to abortions because they're so desperate to get rid of that baby. So people are talking about the fetus, but a living, breathing baby is actually more likely to be killed if they come into this world. But I love what she says about how somebody who's a victim of trauma like that, of rape, of sexual assault, shouldn't have to then go through the additional added trauma of going through such hoops in order to get an abortion. Anyway, it's really unbelievably unfathomable. And the way that our justice system looks right now, with less than 2% of rape cases prosecuted in our federal justice system, it's likely that criminalization of abortion or women who have abortions will actually be higher than people who are criminalized due to rape. In addition, if people rape and they know that there's a likelihood that somebody is pregnant or they find that out, they can then threaten them to not tell the justice system that they've been raped, because then they have fodder on them and they can say that they have had an abortion and they could probably go to jail for longer. That's something that we saw happen a lot in El Salvador and Honduras, where abortion has been illegal for a long time. So let's go into that final interview, Zach.
So I have Josephine here and Lily. Hi Lily! Hi beautiful! So can you tell me what brings you out here today, Josephine?
Well, I'm protesting because they're trying to get rid of Roe v. Wade, and I support it because I needed an abortion to basically survive. I had an ectopic pregnancy, and if I didn't have a medical abortion, I wouldn't be here today, and I wouldn't have my daughter Lily.
Wow. So basically it was having an abortion that saved your
my
life.
and let me go on to be a mother. I had three other children who are older.
Can you tell us tell me about the pregnancy and what kind of pregnancy?
It's called an ectopic pregnancy. It's when your egg doesn't go into your uterus. It stays in your fallopian tube, and the pregnancy grows there, and it's very, very dangerous for women because if it does end up catching in your fallopian tube, the baby will start growing there, and basically it just messes up everything.
Oh God.
Yep.
So where did you have your abortion?
It was at Planned Parenthood.
Wow. In what state?
Here in Maryland.
In Maryland. So I'm sure you're very grateful for Roe v. Wade, it sounds like.
Yes.
How long have you been out here protesting?
I just got here about 20 minutes ago.
What do you think so far?
I think it's a little bit crazy out here. You know, I can understand both stances, but I really do think that we need to have abortion laws here in the United States and everywhere across the states. Like, if we didn't, women everywhere would just be dying or trying to have forced abortions and end up hurting themselves.
Lily, what do you think, beautiful? Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your comments and for coming out here and standing up for women's rights.
Okay, you're welcome.
So that particular interview I found incredibly striking, because as I'm standing there with this mother and her baby who was adorable, she's telling me that her life was at risk, and that had she not had access to an abortion, she would have died. She would have died. And now she has 3 kids happily, and that adorable little girl, Lily. But had she not had access to a safe and legal abortion, she would be dead, and none of her children would have been born. I mean, those kinds of cases are really striking. And I think other cases that we don't talk about is when you find out that the child is going to be multiply handicapped. As somebody who had a severely multiply handicapped sister with a fatal genetic brain disease, who unfortunately passed away this past December, I've seen what parents go through who have children who are multiply handicapped. It is absolutely devastating, and their entire lives essentially have to be dedicated to taking care of that child if they don't have access or are able to afford childcare, all the while knowing that their child has a very short life sentence, is going to die. And I don't think that anybody should be forced into that position. It's just not fair after seeing how devastating it is for these families. So, that argument I don't think is really, holds ground. Am I glad my sister is part of the world? Yes. But again, I don't think that anyone should have to be forced to take care of a multiply handicapped child for their life while they're waiting for the child to die. It's a horrible thing. If you can abort early on, by all means, that is your choice. The other thing that's incredibly important to point out is that this country, which is saying, well, you can't have abortions, has one of the lowest rates of childcare spending in the developed world. So the US spends under about 0.2% of its GDP on childcare. We do not have subsidized childcare. Something that we saw happen during the pandemic was a she session, which was majorly because women the kids were home from school, and most women didn't have childcare to take care of children. So they had to quit their jobs because the burden of care, about 80% of working mothers ended up taking care of children or helping them go to school versus 30% of working fathers. So mothers end up taking that brunt when kids were home from school during COVID. So important to think about that the US is not all of a sudden going to say, okay, well, you're having an abortion, you can't have an abortion, but here's $80,000 for your kid to go to college. Not happening. It's like they only want the fetus to come to viability, but they don't actually care about the actual child once it's born, which makes me feel like this is all about controlling women's bodies and also about the interference of the Catholic Church and whatever the Bible says, which is just stupid. The other thing that the United States doesn't have is we do not have universal paternity and maternity leave. Companies do not have to give maternity and paternity leave. The Family Medical Leave Act says up to 12 weeks unpaid leave for new parents, but a lot of people are excluded. Up until not that long ago, even if you worked at the State Department, there was no paid maternity leave. And thanks to organizing by my old boss, Lillian, and the group, the Balancing Act, that finally got through that the State Department employees got paid maternity leave, but that's not a given here at all by any means. And what if you have a C-section? Then your recovery time is even longer. So there's a hypocrisy of saying, well, we want you to have a baby, but we don't care what happens after you have a baby. Then the baby's off to fare on its own. If the reason you're making it is from an economic perspective and you're saying, I can't afford this child. Other situations I saw on LinkedIn, and I want to just shout out to a guy at HubSpot who said, I can't stay silent, where they ended up having an abortion because it was going to be a stillbirth. And what is the point of bringing essentially a dead baby into this world? I mean, just horrible. And it's also dangerous to the life of the mother. So that's another reason that people have abortions. I mean, there's so many reasons that are just, it's such a private decision. And it's so unfathomable to think that the government is now going to have jurisdiction, especially in consideration of the fact that you have four male justices that are on this, and Amy Coney Barrett, who is super religious, and clearly religion is dictating her decision making. So as Jeryl was talking about, what can you do? Demonstrate. There's local protests happening all over the place, not just in front of the Supreme Court. But I think the most important thing, besides also donating to all these funds, is to get involved for the midterms. Find your local Democratic office or look up the candidates who are pro-choice or anti-choice. Go volunteer, knock on doors, make phone calls, write letters. We need to win the midterms. We have to vote out these state legislatures, which are, again, mostly dominated by men who are going to flip the switch on abortion if Roe v. Wade is overturned. So get out there, volunteer, make sure you vote. That is your right as an American citizen. If you're watching the show, use it. Go vote and volunteer for the midterms and for 2024 so that we can make sure that if this does go into effect, which looks scarily likely that it is going to happen, that we can try to at least manage some of the state's responses to this. But I can't demonstrate to you how much this is a shocking moment in history unfolding right now. And for women especially, it is such an abrogation of our own individual rights as women. In the United States of America, which is all supposed to be about individualism and freedom of choice, that it's just sick. In addition to the fact that it violates the separation of church and state by having the Catholic Church so embedded within this reasoning. So I want to thank you tonight for watching Samanthropolitics. You can tune in again. I'm not sure what our next show is going to be on, but it'll probably be on something international. If you liked this show, please share it. If you are on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, please give us a 5-star review. That helps other people to see our podcast. And then also consider supporting us on Patreon. As a member, you get exclusive access to special things like suggesting what topics I'm going to cover. And for $3 a month, so less than the price of a Dunkin' Donuts coffee, you can support this journalism. So that link is www.patreon.com/Samanthropolitics1. Also, if you want to be an unbelievable feminist leader like Gerald Hayes, consider applying to the Women's Leadership Challenge, which is a feminist leadership program for women from all over the world to come together and figure out, how do we create institutional change? How do we rise? How do we make sure stuff like this doesn't happen? Or when it does, how do we actually effectively put our power to use in getting these things overturned? And that link is www.womensleadershipchallenge.com. And I am your fearless leader and teacher. We have 2 spots left for the July cohort. Our current virtual cohort is full. 2 spots left for the DC cohort coming up in May. The July cohort has a few spots. The virtual cohort is full, that is currently operating. But if you're interested in becoming a feminist leader who can create change and you're feeling powerless in this moment, definitely check out the Women's Leadership Challenge. I also want to thank Stream Inspector. So every time I'm going back and forth with Zach, that is the head of Stream Inspectors, who are the leaders in live stream production. And I'm incredibly grateful. They've now been producing our show since about September of 2020. And I just could not have in a million years have put together such a high quality show without them. So I'm incredibly grateful, and do check out Stream Inspectors if you are sick of grainy Zoom webinars that nobody listens to for your company. Get live stream production. Who knows? Maybe I'll come in and even MC your conference. So until next week, this is Samantha Carlin. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Samanthropolitics.